August 29th, 1842. A British warship anchored off Nanjing. Chinese officials board the ship. They're carrying the imperial seal. They're about to sign a document. They know what's in it. They have no choice. One of the officials is literally in tears as he puts the seal on the paper. What did they just sign? The Treaty of Nanjing, the first of what China will call the unequal treaties. And it's about to change everything. Not just for China, for the entire concept of what a trade war means. Let's talk about what happens when you lose. So what's in this treaty? Let's go through it, because every single clause is designed to humiliate. Clause 1. Pay up. China has to pay Britain 21 million silver dollars. That's about $300 million in today's money. For what? For the opium that Lin Zexu destroyed, for the cost of Britain's military expedition. For reparations. Wait, let me get this straight. Britain forced drugs into China. China destroyed those drugs. Britain invaded China. And now China has to pay Britain for the privilege of being invaded. Yeah. Clause 2. Open your ports. Remember the Canton system? One city for foreign trade? That's over. China has to open 5 ports to British trade: Canton, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai. British merchants can live there, do business there, operate freely. China can't restrict them, can't control them, can't even tax them properly. It's like if China invaded the U.S., won the war, and then forced the U.S. to open New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, Miami, and Houston to Chinese control. Clause 3. Give us an island, Hong Kong. Britain takes it. Outright, permanent possession. China's like, wait, you want an entire island? Britain's like, yeah, we need a base for our opium trade. I mean, for trade in general. Hong Kong stays British until 1997, 155 years. Clause 4. You're no longer sovereign. This is the big one. Britain gets extraterritoriality. That means if a British citizen commits a crime in China, Chinese law doesn't apply. British law does. British courts handle it. So a British merchant can literally do whatever he wants in China, and China can't touch him. Murder someone? British court. Smuggle drugs? British court. This is basically saying, your laws don't apply to us. We're above you. Clause 5. We set the tariffs. China can't decide how much to tax British imports. Britain does. Fixed tariff. 5%. That's it. China has no say. Imagine Mexico invading the U.S. and then saying, also, you can't charge us more than 5% import tax. We decide, not you. And here's what's not in the treaty. Anything about opium. The treaty doesn't mention opium once. Not once. Why? Because if it did, Britain would have to admit, yeah, we just went to war to protect our drug trade. So they leave it out. The opium trade continues. Legally ambiguous. But everyone knows it's protected now. China tried to stop British opium, Britain invaded, China lost, and now opium flows more freely than ever. Mission accomplished, I guess. Here's where it gets worse. Once Britain gets these terms, everyone else wants in. The United States shows up in 1844. Hey, we want the same deal. Treaty of Wanghia gets it. France shows up in 1844. Us too. Treaty of Whampoa gets it. Russia, Germany, Japan. Everyone lines up for their slice. It's called most favored nation status. Whatever China gives to one country, it has to give to everyone. China just lost control of its own territory, its own laws, its own economy, and it happened in less than 5 years. But here's the thing that really breaks China. It's not just the economic loss. It's the psychological impact. For thousands of years, China saw itself as the center of the world, the Middle Kingdom, the most advanced civilization. Everyone else? Barbarians who came to pay tribute. That entire worldview just got shattered. Some Chinese official literally writes, now we know. The barbarians are not barbarians. They're stronger than us. That realization, that China is not the most advanced civilization, not the most powerful empire, not even close. It's devastating. The Qing dynasty never really recovers. The emperor tries reforms, tries to modernize, but it's too late. The damage is done, and other powers smell blood in the water. What happens next is what China calls the Century of Humiliation. 1856, Second Opium War. Britain and France team up. Burn down the Summer Palace in Beijing, one of China's greatest architectural treasures. Force more concessions. 1860, more territory lost, more ports opened. Opium is now explicitly legal. 1894, Japan defeats China in war, takes Taiwan, Korea. China loses to a country it used to consider inferior. 1899, the Boxer Rebellion. Chinese try to kick out all foreigners. 8 nations invade, crush the rebellion, occupy Beijing, force China to pay even more reparations. By 1900, China is carved up like a pie. Foreign powers control different regions. Spheres of influence, they call them. Germany gets Shandong, Russia gets Manchuria, Britain gets the Yangtze River Valley, France gets the Southwest, Japan gets the Northeast. China is technically still a country, but barely. Chinese officials have to get permission from foreign powers to govern their own country. The opium epidemic, it gets worse. By 1906, an estimated 15% to 25% of adult Chinese men are addicted to opium. Tens of millions of people. The economy? Wrecked. Silver keeps flowing out. Industries can't develop because foreign goods flood the market at fixed low tariffs. The military? Humiliated repeatedly. Can't defend their own borders. This goes on for 100 years. From 1842 to 1945. The Qing dynasty collapses in 1911. Republic of China emerges. Warlord period. Civil War. Japanese invasion in the 1930s. More suffering, more loss. It's not until the 1940s, after World War II and years of negotiation, that these unequal treaties finally start getting abolished. The nationalist government begins the process. The communist government continues it after 1949. But the psychological wound? That takes much longer to heal. From 1842 to the mid-20th century, over 100 years of foreign domination, of being carved up, of being told you're inferior in your own country. That becomes part of China's national identity. The Century of Humiliation, all because of a trade war over drugs. So let's step back. What just happened here? Britain had a trade deficit. China wouldn't buy British goods. Britain's solution? Flood China with opium. China tried to stop it. Britain invaded. China lost. Not because they were wrong, but because they were weaker. And when you're weaker, you don't get to make the rules. Britain wrote the treaty. Britain set the terms. Britain decided what's fair. That's the brutal lesson. Trade wars aren't about morality. They're about power. The side with the bigger military gets to define what free trade means. But here's where history gets complicated. Because as devastating as the Opium Wars were, they did something else. They shattered China's illusions. Before 1842, the Qing dynasty was in denial. They thought they were still the center of the world, the most advanced civilization. Everyone else were barbarians. That arrogance, that refusal to see reality, was killing China. The imperial system was rotting from within. Corruption everywhere. Technology stagnant. The government couldn't even modernize because the emperor and his officials refused to believe they needed to. Then the British showed up with steam-powered warships and modern artillery, and that illusion shattered. Suddenly, Chinese intellectuals started asking dangerous questions. Wait. Maybe we're not the most advanced civilization. Maybe we need to learn from these foreigners. Maybe our entire system is broken. A scholar named Wei Yuan writes, "Learn the superior techniques of the barbarians to control them." That becomes the slogan for reform. The Opium Wars kickstart the self-strengthening movement. China starts building modern shipyards, arsenals, telegraphs, railways. They send students to study in Europe and America. Is this because China wants to modernize? No. It's because they got crushed and realized they have no choice. And here's the really uncomfortable part. The shock of defeat starts breaking down the imperial system. The Qing dynasty's legitimacy was based on the idea that the emperor had the mandate of heaven, that China was superior, that the old ways were the best ways. Well, the Opium Wars destroyed that narrative. If the emperor's system can't even defend the country, maybe the emperor doesn't have the mandate anymore. This leads to rebellions, reform movements, revolutionary thinking, and eventually in 1911, less than 70 years after the Treaty of Nanjing, the entire imperial system collapses. 2,000 years of dynastic rule, over. Does that mean the Opium Wars were good for China? Hell no. Millions suffered. Millions died. The opium epidemic destroyed generations. The economic exploitation was real. The humiliation was real. But the paradox is, without that brutal shock, would China have ever modernized? Would the imperial system have ever fallen? Or would it have just continued rotting, getting weaker and weaker, until something even worse happened? History is full of these uncomfortable truths. Sometimes catastrophes force change that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Sometimes you need the old system to collapse before a new one can emerge. The Opium Wars were an atrocity, and they were also a catalyst. Both things can be true, but here's what we can't ignore. The way it happened matters. China didn't choose to modernize on its own terms. It was forced to, at gunpoint, by foreign powers who profited from its misery. That's not the same as voluntary reform. That's trauma. And trauma shapes behavior for generations. Remember how we started this series? China is ripping us off on trade. Massive trade deficits. They won't play fair. In 1839, Britain said the exact same things about China. China had a trade surplus. China wouldn't open its markets. China protected its industries with the Canton system. 2025. China still has a massive trade surplus, still restricts foreign access, still protects state enterprises. Back then, the West was buying Chinese goods and bleeding silver. Today, the West buys Chinese goods and bleeds dollars. The Qing dynasty didn't care about opium addicts. They cared about silver outflows. Today's Chinese government restricts labor organizing. They care about export numbers. The Qing used the Canton system to protect government monopolies. Today's China uses market barriers to protect state-owned enterprises. When China says, "We remember the century of humiliation," never again, are they remembering that the Qing's closed authoritarian system made China vulnerable in the first place? When America says, China needs to play fair, is fair like 1839 when Britain forced opium into China and called it free trade. In 1839, Britain had the guns. They wrote the rules. In 2025, power is balanced. China has economic leverage. America has military and tech dominance. Nuclear weapons changed the game. You can't just send gunboats anymore. But the question remains. When economic interests clash, who decides what's fair? The side that's right or the side that's strong? The Opium Wars didn't teach China to be more open or democratic. They taught China to be strong. Was that the right lesson? So here's what we know. In 1839, a trade dispute over drugs led to war. A technologically superior power forced a weaker country to accept terms at gunpoint. That weaker country spent the next 100 years being carved up by foreign powers. Today, we have another trade dispute. Different products, different countries, but some of the same dynamics. One country with a massive trade surplus and restricted markets, another country with a massive trade deficit and technological advantage. both claiming the moral high ground. What happens next? That's not a question history can answer. That's a question for right now. What do you think? Are we doomed to repeat these cycles? Or can we actually learn from history? Thanks for watching.